Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us here in London, and thank you to our online audience who are tuning in from all parts of the world. I'm Hannah Bretherton, and I'm the Impact and Engagement Manager for the Lao China Institute here at King's College London. I'm delighted to welcome you to day 4 of our inaugural China Week. Today's session, the Green Belt and Road Initiative, looks at the challenges and prospects of the increasing focus on environmentalism in one of China's largest and most controversial frameworks for overseas investment. In 2016, President Xi Jinping committed to developing a greener and more sustainable BRI, following increasing concerns and international pressure surrounding the environmental impact of the initiative. In this session, our panel of experts will share their views on how truly green China's BRI investments are, how this impacts the recipient countries across the developing world, and how the BRI fits into China's broader plans for integrating environmental sustainability into its economic policies. We have a brilliant lineup of speakers today joining us both in person and on the screen, who Alici will introduce in a moment, but a quick bit of housekeeping before I hand over to our chair. So as you can tell, this is a hybrid event, and we do obviously have people in the room and online, and there will be time for audience Q&A. So for those of you here today, have your questions ready and we'll be handing around the microphone. And for those of you on Zoom, please have your questions ready to put in the chat box or the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. That's all from me. So I'm now going to hand to our fabulous chair, Alici Politi, who is a student at the Lao China Institute, and she's writing her PhD on the very topic that we're discussing today. Thank you, Alici.
Thank you, Hannah, and thank you to everyone who has joined us today for this fantastic and timely discussion. Today, we will discuss China's Belt and Road Initiative Green Agenda and what are the future prospects and limitations in reducing the BRI's environmental implications. China's Belt and Road Initiative has been described as the biggest infrastructure project in history. It's a global infrastructure development initiative aiming to connect hundreds of countries globally, and it has been promoting a narrative of mutual benefit and win-win cooperation. However, the initiative has received criticism regarding its colossal environmental implication, with significant effects on BRI recipient countries' ecosystems. Increasing concerns and international pressure surrounding the environmental impact of the initiative pushed President Xi Jinping to declare his commitment in developing a greener and more sustainable BRI. This followed the introduction of the concept of ecological civilization in the constitution of the CCP in 2012. And this concept was then endorsed in 2013, with Xi declaring his intentions to pursue climate change cooperation and support China's renewable energy sector and energy transformation. The initiative has been recognized as playing a fundamental role in meeting the global targets for reduction of CO2 emissions. And whilst China is trying to emerge as a green leader on the global stage, the environmental implication of many BRI projects and obviously also transparency issues surrounding the initiative continue to cause controversy. So I'd like to welcome an exceptional lineup of speakers for this event today. To discuss this topic, we have the pleasure of having here in person with us, Dr. Una Alexandra Berzina Cherenkova, head of Riga Studies University China Studies Center. Una is also head of the Asia program at Latvian Institute of International Affairs and a member of the China-Europe Research Network. She is also European China Policy Fellow at MERIX, and she is one of our affiliates at the Lao China Institute here at KCL. We also have Harry Tillman here with us, chairman at China Investment Research at Reason Speak Services. And then joining us virtually is Professor Daniele Brombal, Associate Professor at Ca' Foscari University of Venice and Fellow at the European Institute for Chinese Studies in Paris, and Dr. Konstantinos Tsimonis, Lecturer in Chinese Society here at the Lao China Institute at KCL. So I'll start our discussion with you, Daniele. So President Xi Jinping announced his pledge of making the BRI greener. However, there are still controversies remaining on the future of the BRI and its environmental impact. What does the BRI's green agenda say about the future of the initiative's environmental implications? And how can we assess the BRI's capacity to engage with transformative, but obviously also crucial solutions to limit its colossal impact?
So thank you, Alicia, for sharing the guiding questions with the audience, and hi, everybody. So to start with, I would like to sort of share with you what we think usually when we think of the Belt and Road Initiative. And what we see basically is a collection of signs, symbols, and lines connecting places on a blank map. So this is pretty much what we think and what we see in our mind when we think about the Belt and Road Initiative. Of course, all this space is not just a blank space, right? So all these different infrastructures that we think of, they are being built and planned across vast territories, which are, places full of life, both human and more than human life. And in many instances, these places are also very vulnerable. So of course, the initiative has a very strong impact on the environment. The first which comes to mind is the environment on the biosphere. As in any case in which you have very large infrastructural projects, they have an impact in terms of habitat destructions and degradation. There are impacts also in terms of water, both water quality and quantity on soil, and of course on the atmosphere. Building these huge infrastructures, of course, is a very much carbon intensive activity. So they have impacts in terms of greenhouse gases emissions. All of this has impacts also on the biocultural sphere. So the culture-nature nexus you have, especially in areas which are areas with indigenous peoples and local communities. So against this background, the trends which we can highlight in terms of the environmental or the green agenda or green agendas of the Belt and Road Initiative are basically about two main areas. So one is about environmental planning and management. And here we have been seeing different developments just in recent years. The first one is about mechanisms for screening, for project screening, especially the green light system, which has been designed and piloted with the coordination of the Ministry of Ecology and Environment. Environmental and social safeguards, which have been designed and put in place by some of the institutions which are funding the initiative, most notably the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. And there's a lot of debate going on in terms of transboundary planning and management, especially due to a few contentious cases which took place, especially for water management, especially between Mongolia and Russia, but also elsewhere. Of course, when we look at these developments, we always have to keep in mind that I think that Kostas later on is going to touch on this point, that the biggest responsibilities when it comes to environmental planning and management are actually falling under the capacity of national governments and local authorities. So environmental impact assessments, all these instruments are not things which are done based on, or can be managed by a unified platform of the Belt and Road Initiative. This is the responsibility of national authorities. And I think we should always be mindful of that. The other great area of debate, and also where increasing commitment and actions are being taken, is the one of finance. So how finance is leveraged to promote greener or more sustainable projects along the Belt and Road Initiative. And also in this case, there have been substantial developments just recently, which can have implications for the Belt and Road. The Green Bond Catalog of China has been revised just recently, and that can have implications. The first green bond, which was issued by the ICBC just a couple of years back, green bond targeting the Belt and Road Initiative. And then Also the issue of green finance. So also here a lot of debate, especially in the ongoing Kunming biodiversity COP, and the first commitments also being made also by the Chinese government. And this could have also implications in this respect, and with reference to the Belt and Road Initiative. And most recently, the announcement made by Xi Jinping to stop funding, well, to stop coal power projects abroad, which should possibly lead to stop also coal power projects funded under the umbrella of the Belt and Road Initiative by China. So coming to the second question, is all of this transformative? So of course, it depends how you define transformation. So transformation, the most consistent and robust, way to define transformation is based on system thinking. And the whole point of transformative change defined based on system thinking is that it is about leveraging mental models and changing values of the people in order to generate change of socio-ecological relationship. So it is pretty much, so the leverage of transformative change is pretty much, cognitive, ethical, and emotional as well. It's about the way we understand the world, the way we think about right and wrong, and also the way we feel about that, because this is the bottom line of decisions we take as individuals, as well as communities and societies. So this is very important because what this paradigm does is that it opens up spaces for unorthodox, some may say radical, approaches to sustainability. So to understand this and how it relates to the Belt and Road, and to try to benchmark the Belt and Road Initiative against this paradigm, probably the best way is to make some practical examples. And to do so, I will use this matrix here, in which you have two main variables. On the one hand, you have different approaches we can have with respect to human welfare and well-being. And on the other hand, different approaches to the environment, all the way from extractive approaches to regenerative, when actually humans try to do good to nature. And for the purpose of our discussion, there are two main areas here which are useful and we should focus on. There is this very big green area right in the middle, which is the area of incremental change. So all of these different approaches you can find in the matrix, and policies as well as movements, they can, they have different, they propose different trade-offs between the environment and society. So this area here in the middle is basically the one we see as mainstream sustainability. So it incorporates both, green growth and also to the other extreme mainstream environmental activism. More often than not, these approaches are based on the very simple idea that harm to nature is very hard to avoid, and so we can mitigate it. More advanced from a transformative perspective, ideas of change when it comes to sustainability are those in this area, the pink one, right in the high right corner here. And this is the area for transformative change. All these different approaches are transformative because they give much importance to that change in values and mindsets, which I was referring to before. So if we try to benchmark and to position the Belt and Road Initiative in this matrix and against these other approaches, it is very much, I would put it very much close to the green growth paradigm. The Belt and Road green agenda is pretty much producing economic growth and trying to spread this also to other areas of the globe while trying to mitigate the harm we do to the environment in the process. So all the information we have and what is happening on the ground is pointing, very clearly in this direction. So to sum up, this approach is hardly transformative, of course, because it does not, entail any kind of social ecological mind shift or cultural change. The green agenda of the Belt and Road is basically about incremental solutions, so trying to find technological and financial and technocratic fixes to problems we have. And in so doing, it amplifies trends which have been already unfolding at global level for quite a while right now. All right, this is all from me, Alice, right now. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Daniele. And Konstantinos, let me come to you next. So you have been conducting brilliant research on the environmental impact of Chinese investments, examining 5 key cases in Southeast Europe. And obviously, when we talk about the Belt and Road Initiative, we have to consider the complexity of actors engaging in the initiative-related projects. And I'd like to ask you, what is the role of Chinese investors and actors in recipient countries in determining the environmental impacts of the Belt and Road Initiative-related projects? And how do these actors interact among each other? And what are the main problems in this process that will need to be tackled?
So hello and good evening from Athens. I'm really sorry to not be with you. I'm currently on research leave, but I have been following this amazing week. So regarding your questions, Alice, there is this commonly held perception, especially in the West, of the Chinese being inherently bad investors, right? Going around the world polluting and so on. And then poor, weak states that are basically dependent, often trapped in deals they cannot do anything about. Now, this is not true. There is quite a lot of agency involved from both the investor side, but also the recipient country, local actors, as Daniela said, and also regional institutions. And we do need a tedious case-by-case approach to understand what is actually going on. And we see very different interactions in the various cases. There are particular factors and actors involved in its investment. But in our research, so this is a published paper, so we can have a look at it afterwards, but I'm just going to outline the main argument. We identify how a synergy of failures between Chinese investors, host states, local actors, and even regional institutions result in poor regulation and compliance. So China is a new player in the Balkan region. We focus on the Balkan region, and its investment and financing have attracted both negative and positive reactions. Often these are based on geostrategic, structural, or not even normative considerations. But there are increasingly concerns over sustainability and very reasonable concerns. So what we try to do is not really to answer whether Chinese capital is detrimental to environmental protection in a black or white dichotomy. Instead, we ask in what ways Chinese finance projects present challenges to sustainability. Can we see some common themes there? And especially in relation to environmental protection and decarbonization, which is a big question globally, of course, but also in the Balkan region. Now, in our case selection, we looked for cases and we selected them for their importance to national economy, for their negative environmental impact. We try to factor in sectoral variety, but also the degree of EU association. So, because in the Balkan region, especially the Western Balkans, are not part of the EU. So the Balkan region offers a good case to really test the normative influence and regulatory influence of the EU in the regulation of this project. So we have countries like Greece, full members, and we have countries that are have candidate status. So just a quick overview of the cases we looked at. Of course, we started with the Piraeus Port. COSCO brought its own understanding of environmental issues as secondary during negotiations. So we saw that early on. There was really no commitment to public consultation and compliance with standards, which was seen more or less as a bureaucratic exercise, like box ticking. So we did see COSCO bringing in an understanding of sustainability and how we go about regulating that. That was different than the European norm. But also, especially, so the first investment was in 2008, then the privatization in 2016. Across this period, we see very little political will from the local, from the national government to actually enforce compliance. Meanwhile, problems piled up, problems with air pollution, marine pollution, of course, and noise pollution. Now, Kostelac's coal power plant in Serbia and the next one in Bosnia and Herzegovina, these are cases where Chinese investment actually delayed transition to cleaner forms of energy, right? Because no European country, no European company is going to build a coal power plant. Now, the interesting thing here is that these investments were not really driven by the Chinese; they were driven by national governments. So the Serbian government, in the case of Kostolac, was adamant on proceeding with this. And they signed a bilateral treaty with the Sino-Serbian infrastructural framework is based on a bilateral treaty that has very weak transparency, very vague legal stipulations, no provisions for tenders. Okay, so this was it created really conditions for lack of oversight, and more or less this is also the case in Stanari in Bosnia and Herzegovina, where we had things like changing the entire project from the beginning to the end, and essentially building a much less efficient and cheaper design. Without even a new environmental impact assessment. Okay, and really, in both cases, environmental impact assessments are not really followed through. And of course, this would have not been possible without the support and backing of local actors. Sending clear messages to the Chinese investors that don't worry about it. We'll sort it out. Now, the fourth case we looked at is the Kicevo-Ohrid highway in northern Macedonia, where we have significant environmental and geotechnical issues that were raised, ignored again by the government. It has caused problems with, the whole project threatens animal life, and especially the Balkan links in the region, along other issues. And the last one is an oil field in Albania, the Patos-Marinza one, that was essentially what we have is a Chinese company buying a Canadian company and immediately exhibiting disregard for any kind of environmental standards and previously agreed arbitration processes and intensifying fracking activities, okay, which led to earthquakes, which led to all sorts of problems. Now, where is the EU in all these cases? So the EU, of course, is very good at providing regulations, right? That's why we love the EU in Europe, and many people in the UK don't. The EU provides standards and initiatives, and these are very crucial, provide a crucial context for regulation in all cases. But the EU's role and political kind of will is ambivalent at best. It provides standards, but really not aid in compliance. So we have in practice, we have conflicting normative priorities from in relation to more specific issues, but also to broader issues. So the Piraeus privatization was under the EU bailout, right? So Greece had to sell the port. And it had to sell under a lot of pressure. And of course, there was very limited ability for the Greek government to regulate anything related to the environment under such pressure from the EU. In the case of Kostolac, the coal power plant, that was challenged on state aid grounds at some point, not on environmental standards. There were clear problems there. And the broader issues is, first of all, let's face it, infrastructure upgrading in the Balkans is really demanded, but funds are scarce. So what are you going to do exactly? What do you expect these countries to do? And does the EU, of course, actually want the Western Balkan states as members, right? Because if you want the Western Balkan states as members, what you do is you try to help them build capacity to enforce compliance, okay? Not just throw them a box-ticking exercise that might take decades. Now, and to conclude, I want to present this whole picture of the synergy of failures. So we have the Chinese actors clearly failing at things like environmental impact assessments. We see them not taking it seriously, not knowing how to deal with it, but always right, assisted in a way by local actors. The same stands for compliance and for engagement with civil society. So Chinese, especially SOEs, do not really understand the whole thing of, you need to be transparent, engage with civil society, win people over. So they exhibit ignorance of regulatory, technical, and legal standards. And overall, there is this understanding of environmental issues as a matter of bilateral government negotiation, not compliance. Okay, we will deal with the government. We'll call a minister and sort this out. No, environmental compliance shouldn't be that. Now, host governments exhibit lack of capacity and will to enforce compliance, to put it mildly. And we see that across the board. Actually, the only government that really stepped its foot was the Albanian one, that after a big civil society kind of uproar, it stepped in and asked the Chinese company to stop its fracking. Now, and of course, in all these deals, especially not so much in the Greek case, but in the Western Balkan deals, we see that host governments, we see that there is a lack of transparency in these deals that mitigate against civil society oversight. And then, of course, we have the regional organizations and the EU that provide weak incentive structure to address and weak capacity assistance to address either of the above. So as a result, what we see is not so much a race to the bottom, right? Because also some of these projects are not antagonistic to create conditions of race to the bottom, but drift to the lowest common denominator, which contributes to things like delayed decarbonization, continuous environmental issues with many of these investments. So that's all from me.
Thank you so much, Kostas. And this really underscores well the complexity of actors interacting in the Belt and Road Initiative, and obviously the failures that can come out from this synergy, and which is then reflected in the Belt and Road Initiative's project's environmental implications. So I'd like now to hear from Harry. And so I guess looking towards the future, does the Belt and Road Initiative have the capacity to reduce its level of CO2 emissions and more broadly container shipping's level of CO2? And also I'd like to ask you, what role would technology play in achieving this?
Can everyone hear me okay? Thank you. I have three remarks to start before I get into the slides. Remark number one is thank you for inviting a commercial financier who actually tracks all those financial returns you just saw. So our core business at Greason's Peak is providing advice in technology and capital raising. And for people that don't understand, the BRI is an 8 trillion project. Only 1 trillion comes from China. The other 7 trillion comes elsewhere. So we provide the financial clarity on what returns are to get investors to invest in these things. And to show you numbers, it's 1 trillion from Chinese investment. The US has spent $6.4 trillion on wars since 2001, right? So all this noise about BRI 1 trillion versus 6.4 trillion, and that's a Brown College Award number, and my friends from Harvard are listening, they'll confirm this today. So point number one, thank you for permitting a commercial guy coming in here. Secondly, I'm presenting on, I was here on Monday morning and there were so many questions about 2030 to 2060. What's China really doing? I'm happy to report I don't have to address that today because apparently the ambassador last night issued a one-page statement to the Guardian of saying, here's what's happening here. And also if you want questions about if you will, Bloomberg follows this quite closely about investments that are coal power that have been terminated. Now, my presentation is about 3 different technologies which are transformative. My word's transformative. Someone else might say no, and this is not possible to do in 8 minutes. It is absolutely impossible. So, for those of you that are interested, I'm doing this in Sweden for 20 minutes on the 10th of November, with a focus on the third and the most important of those, which is why Mr. Gates was here, me with Boris Johnson 2 weeks ago. So without further ado, let's move to the next slide. Well, so maybe sorry, I made a mistake on that. Let's stay on the cover slide first. So there are 3 different technologies. I put 2 up here today. There's one more I wanted to share with you, which I did 2 weeks ago for 50 countries in Iceland, including eight governments. And that's the what's happening relative to Arctic LNG. So forget it's called the Polar Silk Road led by China, but actually it's not true, because in the Arctic, 60% of the people living in the Arctic are Russian. 1/3 of all landmass in the Arctic is Russian. So Russia's driving this. And the first investor in this was Japan in 2009. The second investor was France in 2011. The third investor was China in 2014, Korea 15, Japan 17, UAE 21. So it's now 8 different countries involved in this. It's less CO2, substantially less CO2 than you get for fuel oil. By 2024, it should be about 80 million tons per year by 2024, which will be the same level as Qatar. Yes, and it's much cheaper to run. And this is a major transformation from coal in China to LNG. Now, the EU doesn't think very highly of LNG, but it's transformational. So I only raise the point that this is now 8 countries, 41% of the world's population, and it's much cheaper than Western. And it's a direct competitor to USA and Australia. This is led by Putin. It's not led by China. And it has 8 different other countries working with them. So this is not China led. Now, can we go to this? Thank you. The next is high-speed rail. On the left-hand side, you see that? I hope this works. Left-hand side. In 2011, there were 17 trains that crossed between China and Europe. In 2021, we're on the route for 20,000. It can't handle anymore out of Shenyang. It actually is stopped, and China Rail had to stop it because of COVID and because of sort of other things that actually make it work. Everything's backed up basically. So you can see in the process of that, 1% of the world shipping had gone in, was back here in rail, electric rail, and now we're at 8% of the world shipping in this. Next slide, please. And this shows your favorite, the old Russian TSR. Here's the original Silk Road. In the center, you will see a shortcut, basically, which reduces mileage considerably, right? And you'll see this runs through Turkey. So there'll be 2 major roads coming through the east into China, but into Europe. Both will run through Turkey. So our friend Kostas will hear about a lot more activity as he goes further along. So anyway, it's a huge reduction already here in terms of time. And again, I'll go on to another slide in a second, but this shows you. Now this, not only is it working for high-speed rail in Europe, and I'll show you pieces of that in a few minutes. It's also happening in Southeast Asia. If you go to the next slide, thank you. This is regular rail now between Myanmar and Yunnan province. It's regular rail now from Vietnam into Yunnan province. Those are both regular rail. However, that was 2020. By 2021, Laos to China, high-speed rail. 160 clicks. And I'll go a little later. And we also, in Bangkok this year, they authorized Bangkok through China. That's 230 kilometers per hour, also electric. Yes, which will have an impact on shipping again. Next slide, please. Here we go here. So it's hard to see, sorry. So maybe let's start here in the corner. Here's Laos, there's Laotian high-speed rail. Here's Myanmar, we just told you about. Here's Laos, Bangkok, we just told you about. And this is also functioning this year. Indonesia, high-speed rail here. Ultimately, this will all be high-speed rail linked from Yunnan province all the way down into Singapore and Indonesia, ultimately. Again, lightening the load on shipping. And again, relieving the pressure points in Shenyang. My view is that there's the Turkish road we talked about already, a link, yes. Ultimately, that's the 120 billion number, I think, which Iran. This has been approved already. In Pakistan, that's 160 clicks. To Pakistan, functional 2026. and I think it'll go through Iran in 2030. And this itself will reduce it to maybe 4 days. 4 days. Meanwhile, back to Russia. Russia already has high-speed rail between St. Petersburg and Moscow. They're planning high-speed rail from Belarus into Slovakia, and they have the high-speed rail cars already built for a 7-day passage. So we started with UK, Yiwu to 18 days 4 years ago. Now we're talking 7 days with high-speed rails, 4 days, electric, no fuel. This is all happening. It's not just in the future. This is actually happening now, but it won't be all high-speed rail before 2030, which is what this is about today, which is to say down the road. Now the best for last. Next page, please. Right. Let me just talk to this for a second. So basically, if the shipping industry were a country, it would be the 6th largest polluter countries in the world. Yes? Yes, from CO2 emissions. So if you don't know, Maersk, the largest shipping company, consumes 1 day of the world's fuel oil by itself every year. Yes, there are 60,000 container ships supporting using fuel oil every day. So they're under tremendous pressure from the EU to reduce carbon emissions, as you can appreciate. Yes, and so looking at all kinds of options. You see the second point saying it's not going very quickly. EU's not very happy. IMO's not very happy. So they're starting to look at options. So Maersk is looking at an option where they're co-investing with Buffett in a series of methane or green methanol in the USA. I think they made 7 or 8 investments, and those ships should be prepared, rekitted with methanol by 2023, 2024. So it's moving again slowly, but it's moving. But to save the best to last, is a new technology called MSR, which really isn't a new technology at all. It's molten salt reactor. So this really came about initially from US submarines in the 1950s. And actually the US had the first molten salt reactor plant in 1969, and it was used in a ship. MSR, there's no plutonium, there's no uranium, and therefore from an explosive point of view, it was never developed. You can't weaponize MSR. Yes? So MSR is being aggressively developed in a foot race of countries around the world. I want this to be on tape to hear this, because I get to see it and feel it when I'm presenting in these much bigger venues. And you watch these serious countries chase each other. So China first launched this with Japan in 2011. And China currently is ahead because China's just launched its first middle-sized reactor last month, and also the MSR technology that also launched this month. Now, why is that important? Because basically the US has been trying to do this as well with the Atomic Energy Commission with a guy named Gates. You may recognize that name from around 2005, 2006. And we in this country here have the world's only company called Core Power UK, which is launched 3 years ago. They've just sold Series A, Series B have both been sold out. They're based in Chiswick. But the goal is to make this commercial by 23, 24, but fully commercial by 28. So by 2030, it is possible of those 60,000 ships around the world, container ships around the world using fuel oil. They may not need them at all, because once you build that power pack, which is made out of thorium and non-explosive, you can kit it in one of those ships. So the ships basically are much lighter, can go much faster, and it can have a huge change in the world's CO2 emissions. There's a lot more to the physics of this. I'm sure you can spend your time looking at this, but we're out of time, so I'm gonna have to go.
I feel I have to push you for time here. Is it okay?
It's fine.
Okay, but many thanks, Harry, and that's incredibly fascinating. And we have obviously a wide range of opinions here on this panel. And I'll come to Una now, but before those here in the audience, but also the audience joining us remotely, please start thinking about your questions. People joining remotely, start putting your question in the Q&A box. And now I have some questions for Una now. So we have explored the BRI green agenda and the problems emerging from the synergy, obviously, of a complex range of factors interacting on BRI related projects. And I would like now to shed some light on what the position of BRI host countries in the on the environmental impacts of the BRI is. So the case of Russia with the 2021 Russian National Security Strategy shows how environmental thinking is becoming more and more important in determining host countries' interaction with the BRI. And so I'd like to ask you, what is the position of BRI recipient countries in regard to BRI environmental concerns? And if you could please provide some perspective on this. Thank you.
Thank you, dear Alice. And yes, first of all, it's an honor and a great pleasure to be here in this venue. And oh, it's packed, and that also adds a little bit to the stress, but at the same time in a good way. And thank you for being here. Yes, it is a very interesting and multi-layered question that you asked. So let me kind of try to approach this. And this is a really interesting case. And I don't know if the slide, so can we have the first slide, please? Well, the first slide is just the name, so I'll just keep talking for now. I just want to say that it's an interesting case because it would seem, that Russia is opening itself up to this environmental responsibility, at least according to the strategy, kind of coincides and rings back to China's outlooks on ecological, civilization. And I think this morning's panel on biodiversity kind of also pointed out, we had Sam Jill and Zhou Junfeng speaking on that. And that would again lead to the assumption that there's some space for positive agenda there, right? But how are things really? Trying to make this interesting. So now to the second slide, which is fine. The second slide is just Putin talking at a BRF forum. You're not losing anything, don't worry. I'll just talk you through it. In order to answer Lichi's question, I think we need to first back it up a little bit and see what is Russia's position towards Belt and Road in general. Is it a Belt and Road country? And the answer, in fact, is no. Russia is not a BRI signatory. It is not a BRI country. Now, let me explain this a little bit. We do have Putin as one of the, sorry? Oh yeah, we don't need the video, just the pictures. I wasn't very good at cropping, sorry, it looks like a video. I just needed the picture of Putin speaking at the BRF farm. So yes, indeed, Putin is an esteemed and a welcome guest at these events. And he speaks, he gives keynotes. But if we examine the speeches, what he really does is he takes that opportunity to speak about Eurasian connectivity at large and to peddle and to promote Eurasian Economic Union and to speak about how Russia what is there in terms of common vision with China. But Russia, in fact, Russia does have a relation with Belt and Road, but it is as a part of the Eurasian Economic Union, the connection to one leg of Belt and Road, which is the SREB, the Silk Road Economic Belt. So that is the format how Russia is linked to Belt and Road. Obviously, the Chinese messaging kind of blurs that a little bit because it's important also for the message to demonstrate Russia as being on board on this. So I just wanted to put it out there to make that clear. Now to the third slide, and that's the one I went out of my way to add some text. Thank you. So when we let's go back to the initial topic and to the framework that Alice tasked me with. Two things are interesting about the 2021 Russian security strategy in comparison to its predecessor of 2015. The first thing is that it really kind of deprioritizes China in comparison to the previous document. The previous document said that the People's Republic is a key factor in maintaining global and regional stability. China had its own clause, its own point in the strategy. But now, 6 years later, PRC is merely, along with India, a possible contributor to trustworthy mechanisms that ensure regional stability. So kind of really a downgrade there. The other interesting thing about the strategy is that this security strategy admits the centrality of environmental thinking as a cornerstone of Russia's development. And again, interestingly, so yes, there was some ecology buzzwords in the previous strategy as well. There was a section on living systems ecology, rational use of nature. But it was mostly talking, I think, to go back to what Daniela said about, this non-transformative attempts at mitigating impact. So basically, how do we pollute less? How do we, the rivers are in a bad shape. How do we make these companies maybe not throw out all of their trash into the water? That kind of level. So decrease of industry impact. Whereas now you see ecology listed under national interests, environment protection, safekeeping of natural resources, rational use of nature, adaptation to, drumroll, climate change. So here in this strategy, Russia clearly admits human caused climate change and talks about that, green economy and low carbon economy are the only ways and the main topics to tackle that. Which is really interesting. Now, how do these things measure up against each other? Of course, Belt and Road does not appear in any of these documents because, like I said, Russia is not really a part of it. But what does this mean for Russia, China, and Russia, Belt and Road? And I would argue that, sometimes we hear that this means that Russia considers China to be unimportant. I disagree with that. I would go with the reading that this is an attempt to demonstrate that China is not special, is not sui generis, is not unique, but we're kind of on the same level. So not spotlighting it anymore. But it doesn't mean that China isn't important. Now, I'm really taking up my pace here. I can see you're, sorry. Okay. Now to the fourth slide, please. And let's talk, but why is this approach to China, this distance then? Not because Russia considers it to be unimportant, but because Belt and Road actually is a point where it's a pinnacle of two of Russia's largest fears when it comes to environment. Now, the first fear is the distrust of the local governments, kind of knowing that local officials can be bought off, they don't really care, and the center can't really control them. Now, the second major line of fear is the distrust towards outside actors. And this is not China exclusively. This is, the West, this is, you name it. And these fears, we can't say they're not grounded because there are plenty of documents where the Russian central government itself actually admits that over 15% of the country's territory, where the most population and the most productive agricultural lands are concentrated, is assessed as unfavorable in terms of environmental parameters. And what is China afraid of when it's talking about, BRI products? Sorry, what is Russia afraid of? We're talking resource extraction, export of outdated tech. A lot of stuff has been written on that. I think Henry can back me up here. So that some outdated tech could be exported. No oversight, again, waterway air pollution, and the melting Arctic, which is an issue for Russia. So Russia does not really believe that Belt and Road can provide serious environmental protection, but rather believes that it's kind of a cheap and heavy solution on the ground. So neither does it see China as a big investor. Now, what's next? What's in store? The last slide, I promise. What can we, argue? What can we see in terms of Russia and Belt and Road environmentally? Sorry. So I think we can quote Irina Glazirina, who writes that it is impossible to find a common solution for these problems. Success depends on the specific socioeconomic conditions of the country, namely Russia or region. And that, I think that brings back nicely to points made by Daniela and also Kostas, that local agency kind of makes and breaks a Belt and Road project. And that the negative implications come from a synergy of these failures, and to quote Kostas, the inability to force compliance. But just to conclude, I want to say that the fact that these two countries, these two major Eurasian players, actually acknowledge environmental issues and the severity of them, they're not deniers, they're not disruptive in this sense, is good news for us. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Una. And we will now have 10-15 minutes for Q&A. So we will start with some questions from the audience who's here in person today. And we're taking a couple of questions from our in-person audience. Okay, we can start with Astrid here.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for a really exciting and inspiring panel. My name's Astrid Nordin. I'm a professor at the Lao China Institute. And I was really interested in this idea of kind of the possibility of an underlying shift in minds, in hearts and minds, as it were, and the mental attitudes that was brought up on this panel. And I wonder, from the various kind of contexts that you all study, if you could comment on if and where you see seeds of other kind of discourses, other environmental narratives, or other narratives about the relationship between humans and nature that you think offer some kind of promise of a greener future for the Belt and Road and its initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Astrid. And Daniele, would you like to address this one, and then we open up to the other panelists?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for this question. So, well, first of all, it's very difficult to understand where these seeds are. What we are trying to do, at least in my research group in Venice, is to try to plant them. So we have been testing with different practitioners and people who are involved, especially activists involved in areas having an impact from the Belt and Road Initiative. We are trying to test different models of, you may define them as public participation tools and instruments. Technically, these are called envisioning practices. So they really come from, the work from Donella Meadows and system thinking, in which you try to envision and to project different scenarios related to these specific projects. And they can be really helpful. So far, what we can do is to try to test these different approaches, and the results are very often quite surprising. We tested those actually also with a few Chinese executives and people working in different companies, big and small companies in Canton a couple of years back, just before COVID, because we have a training on sustainable corporate management there. And also there, the results were really surprising. Of course, one thing is to crystallize an idea and share it with others. It's a totally different matter to try to translate that into practice. So that's, to bridge that thing is still pretty difficult for us to understand how to do that. Actually, we are launching a project next year on that. It's a one-year project and try to sort of map where these transformative seeds along the Belt and Road are. So probably I will be able to say more about that in a year from now, more or less.
Thank you very much, Daniele. And Kostas, would you like to add on that?
Yeah, I mean, thank you, Astrid. This is the $1 million question, of course. So I will say that the seeds will not come from the nation state level because short-term kind of objectives will continue to triumph over long-term sustainability issues. I'm very pessimistic about that. I don't see it happening like that. I mean, right now we have a problem with the gas supply and everyone is firing up coal power, right? So let's go back to the 19th century. But I think I'm more optimistic about civil society. And there has been quite a lot of organization around that in Southeast Europe. We have various groups in Piraeus suing Costco. We have actually right now there is a strike, by the way. We have in Albania there was a long march of local citizens to Tirana to protest. We have very sophisticated NGOs on the ground in places like Serbia and Bosnia and Herzegovina. So I think that civil society will play here a much bigger role, and especially in regulating these new investments. And to be honest, it doesn't really matter where the money comes from. What really matters is the fact that we have new money coming in, and local states are wishing basically to fund projects that, regardless of sustainability concerns, we see that across the board. And of course, but then we have the EU, right? So in the EU, when we're talking about the EU, we need to be very strict and kind of demanding, because the EU has tried to regulate, it created this screening mechanism for foreign investments on public security, on public order and national security grounds. But that's not really the issue. The issue is with sustainability. You need to screen all these. We need to have a very elaborate screening mechanism on sustainability grounds, and that's what is missing. And I think that's what we will soon get in the EU.
Thank you very much, Kostas. And we will now take another question from the in-person audience, and then we come back to our panelists. Yes.
Thank you very much. I'm Anli Ouyang from the University of Bath. I have a question about the environmental law and the regulation, because I think there is a perpetual gap between both. So I'm wondering through which governmental or non-governmental platform could we improve the transparency and regulation on environmental issues? And also, do you think BRI as a new initiative, new platform initiated by a developing country, whether we will need a new platform compared with some existing old order? Yeah, that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I guess I'd like to turn to Una for this question, if that's okay, and then open up to the panel.
Perfect, thank you. Maybe I will leave the first part of the question to my colleagues and just to kind of grasp onto the second part, whether a new platform will emerge, if I understood you correctly. I think that already the idea of Belt and Road has launched a lot of change, and not just environmentally speaking, but in terms of competing in kind of a marketplace of ideas competition on how do we approach global connectivity and how do we approach Eurasian connectivity. And of course, environment and responsibility are one of the key points here. So everybody's kind of, with the European connectivity strategy and with the Build Back Better world, all these ideas, it's about, doing a better job or to presenting a better idea than China, which is an interesting time. So I guess that in a sense, this is already a new era in terms of. So I don't think this necessarily calls for a new platform, but this is definitely a new development.
Thank you very much, Una. And we have now space for another in-person question. Okay. Oh, okay. Sorry, I couldn't see that because it's like behind my shoulder. So Daniele, please, you can answer. Yeah.
So just very quick reply to that question. So I think there are two levels here. So the first one is the level of screening that funding institutions make to these projects. And so that happens right at the beginning when they go to host countries, propose a project or the other way around. And of course, a lot of work can be done there. Then the key issue actually is the regulations that each country has for evaluating the impact on the environment. And that is the place where you make things more effective from a sustainability perspective. Of course, there is the risk that this is used, as Kostas was saying, as just a tick box exercise. And that's very common, not only in China, in many countries, including European countries. So that's the place where to work on that. Global platforms, there are a lot of UN conventions on the impacts of huge infrastructures on the environment and transboundary impacts. So there is, a lot of things out there which could be already providing a platform to do that. So I agree with Una on that. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And I guess Harry wanted to say something as well.
I would like to just comment. There's theory and there's reality. And so the first attempt by Donald Trump's administration to compete with the Belt and Road, if you go to Mozambique Total, it's a 50 billion investment. It was overrun by ISIS. The US is out 5 billion. The UK, Japan, and India are out 1 billion. And it's a force majeure. So in essence, those loans, by reigniting, if you will, the US Exim Bank to participate in a Mozambique situation for liquid natural gas, money leaked to ISIS, Total was declared force majeure. So the US's first attempt to beat Xi, and telling everybody Mr. Trump did, if we beat him, we won this big 50 billion project. It's actually force majeure, and all the shareholders, including the UK government, lost money. So it's a good thing to say we could try it, but it's never always easy. It's never easy to actually make it work.
Thank you very much, Harry. And I guess there was one question from the gentleman in with red jacket there.
Hi, I'm Hildred from King's College. So I missed something. I don't know your second name, Harry. So since you, where's the power coming from for all of these additional train lines that you're talking about? If it's not, what's the source of the energy that's going to be used on
Electric.
So, right. So how is it going to be generated?
I think it depends on the country, isn't that right?
Well, that's the big issue. How are you going to generate it? I mean, is it going to be nuclear? Is it going to be wind? Is it going to be air?
Sorry, I think I don't have the numbers per se for each country, what they want to do by country.
Mhm.
And I don't have those even for China today. I mean, there's a statement made by the ambassador of what the aspirations are of split. But I do think atomic will play a bigger role going forward. As you've seen, they are now testing small nuclear reactors, not the big stuff. So I think atomic will play a bigger role, which is why I think Bill Gates was here talking to Boris Johnson about playing a role in a smaller atomic, because what we're talking about now is not plutonium or uranium.
Well, so far, China's only built one nuclear plant on the Belt and Road, or at least it's planned only one. I'm not even sure it's built. So there doesn't seem to be any nuclear in this picture.
Sorry, I'm suggesting, when I was saying that, they just tested 2 of these in the last month.
These minis.
Sorry, one of those.
These are modular nuclear.
One is small nuclear,
Right.
it's just being tested, and one is MSR, which is just being tested. First time that's being tested since 1969. So it takes a while to make these things happen, but I do think atomic will play a bigger role. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we are out of time now. So thank you very much, everyone. Thank you so much to our fantastic speakers today and to our audience joining us in person and remotely. It's been a really fascinating discussion and a real pleasure to talk with you all today. So China Week's program for today is not finished, and we are hosting a screening and discussion of the film The Mermaid this evening at 6:30 p.m. at the auditorium in Bush House. And also please check out our program, both physical, you can find it there when you exit the room, and online as well, about tomorrow's events. So we will have a panel discussion tomorrow morning at 10:30 a.m. exploring the role of youth in the fight against climate change. And then our closing reception and anniversary celebration tomorrow evening. So check out the details on the program, and have a great evening, everyone. And thank you everyone again for joining today. Thank you.